Oh, hey there. You're tossing and turning again, aren't you? Staring at the ceiling, wondering if your life lacks, perhaps a touch more dysentery, or the thrilling uncertainty of whether you'll survive winter. Good news. You've stumbled into the right dark alley of the internet. Because let me tell you, if you think your Monday morning commute is rough, or that your Wi-Fi dropping is a tragedy, you are spectacularly, hilariously, and perhaps fatally unprepared for the medieval world. Tonight, we're going to explore just how deeply, deeply screwed you'd be. No heroism, no romance, just the cold, damp, and frequently smelly truth. Welcome to your favorite medieval channel, where we lovingly unearth every reason you should. Kiss your smartphone and thank your lucky stars for antibiotics. Now, before we dive into the abyss, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you're into this kind of historical self-torture. It helps the algorithm, which is sort of like a medieval guild, but with less ale and more unpredictable whims. And hey, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? I love seeing which part of the world you're joining from. Let me know in the comments. Misery loves company, especially when that company is separated by several centuries and a decent internet connection. Tonight we'll see why you'd regret being a knight in the 1300s, and then, just for kicks, we'll peek into the not-so-charming life of a peasant. Prepare for an uncomfortable, yet hopefully amusing journey. So you fancy yourself a knight, eh? Clad in shining armor, hero of song and legend? That's adorable. Wipe those chivalric romance novels from your brain, the ones with the surprisingly good dental hygiene and the distinct lack of dysentery. The 1300s are calling your name, and trust me, the signal is terrible, the roaming charges are astronomical, and your destiny is less noble hero and more heavily armed target with questionable life choices. This isn't a fantasy RPG, it's a historical horror show, and you're the star. Let's assume you were lucky enough to be born into a noble family. Congratulations, your primary inheritance is a crushing weight of expectation and a slightly higher chance of not dying from starvation in your first winter, though don't count on it. This noble birth doesn't mean luxury. It means your parents have already mentally signed you up for this nightly gig, mostly because it's slightly more socially acceptable than admitting they just want you out of the house. Their medieval LinkedIn profile for you is already pre-filled. Future sword fodder. Around the tender age of 7. Yes, 7 when you're probably still mastering the art of not eating dirt. Your real adventure begins. You're shipped off to the castle of another lord or knight to become a page. No tearful goodbyes with a packed lunch and a juice box. It's more like being dropped off at the universe's worst boarding school, where the primary subjects are obedience and avoiding. Random acts of casual medieval violence. Mom's probably relieved. One less mouth to feed questionable gruel to. Life as a page? Forget heroic training montages. It's 90% chores, 10% humiliation. You're serving at table, running errands, cleaning things that will never truly be clean, and learning to be invisible unless a grown-up knight needs something. Which is always. Think of it as an unpaid internship where the coffee is terrible, and instead of a water cooler, there's a perpetually damp stone wall. You're learning the intricate medieval art of shut up and fetch that. Your education involves basic manners, how to bow, how not to pick your nose in front of the Duchess, the correct way to address someone who could have you flogged. You might learn some reading if your lord is particularly progressive, or if there's a bored priest with time to kill. Mostly, you're learning religious doctrine, which boils down to, life is suffering, and it's probably your fault. Oh, and maybe some music, so you can later serenade a lady who likely can't stand you. The perks are, well, non-existent by modern standards. You get the leftover food from the high table, if the dogs don't get there first. Your clothes are probably hand-me-downs from a slightly larger, recently deceased page. You sleep on a straw pallet in a drafty hall with a dozen other, snoring, equally miserable boys. Your medieval influencer starter pack includes chilblains, a perpetually runny nose, and a deep understanding of how many shades of brown exist. Fast forward to about age 14. If you haven't succumbed to some delightful medieval childhood, disease, or a misplaced kick from a horse, you get a promotion. You're a squire now. Huzzah! This means you've graduated from being a general dog's body to a specialized dog's body, personally assigned to a knight. The pay is the same, zilch, but the chores now involve significantly more heavy lifting and proximity to extreme violence. Lucky you. As a squire, your primary relationship is with your knight's horse. You feed it, groom it, muck out its stall. That horse eats better and lives more comfortably than you do. Then there's the armor. Polishing it, repairing it, helping your knight into and out of it. A process akin to canning a very angry sardine. You carry his shield, his spare lance, his existential dread. You're basically his caddy valet and personal pack mule, all rolled into one. Now the weapons training gets serious, and by serious, I mean seriously painful. You're swinging heavy swords, maces, and axes until your arms feel like overcooked noodles. Your instructor isn't some patient sensei. He's a battle-scarred veteran who communicates primarily through grunts and by whacking you with a wooden stick whenever you mess up. Which is often. Forget elegant swordplay. This is brute force and hoping you don't accidentally lop off your own foot. Then comes learning to fight on horseback, often in armor. Imagine trying to do gymnastics on a rodeo bull while wearing a refrigerator box. The first few dozen times you'll just fall off. The next few dozen you'll fall off with the horse. It's a masterclass in acquiring bruises in places you didn't know you had. And all this under the scornful gaze of seasoned knights who've seen it all and are not impressed by your flailing. Your nightly glow-up is mostly just accumulating scars. Let's not forget the constant, gnawing threat of injury. Training accidents are an accepted part of the curriculum. A badly parried blow, a fall from a horse, a misplaced arrow during archery practice. Because of course, young Jeffrey is a terrible shot. There's no sterile clinic or magical healing potions. A broken bone might mean a lifetime of limping, if infection doesn't get you first. Walk it off is peak medieval medical advice. Meanwhile, your family is practically bankrupting themselves to keep you on this path. A good warhorse costs more than a small farm. A suit of armor? That's like buying a luxury car today, except it rusts and offers terrible ventilation. Weapons, upkeep, the occasional bribe to your knight for extra tutelage. It all adds up. They're investing their entire medieval 401k into you, hoping you don't just become an expensive casualty. No pressure. So there you are, a teenager caked in mud, sweat, and probably some horse manure. Constantly tired, frequently hungry, nursing a collection of painful injuries, and slowly realizing that the stirring tales of chivalry were probably written by someone who never had to scrub rust off a hauberk. The glorious life of a knight? Right now it feels more like an elaborate, centuries-long prank. And the worst part? You haven't even seen a real battle yet. Sweet dreams. So you've managed not to die or run away screaming. Impressive. Your knight, perhaps in a moment of sheer boredom, or because he's lost too many other squires in regrettable training incidents, deems you ready. This often involves the charming ritual of a vigil. You, alone, in a cold, drafty chapel, supposedly contemplating piety and your future noble deeds. In reality, you're probably contemplating how many layers of wool you'd need to not freeze your unmentionables off, and whether that suspicious creaking sound is a rat, a ghost, or just the ancient building threatening to collapse on your holy moment. The only thing you're truly vigilant about is trying to stay awake and not drool on the altar. This spiritual preparation feels an awful lot like waiting for a bus that never comes, in a freezer. The knighting ceremony itself. A tap on the shoulder with a sword. Try not to flinch, it's considered bad form. Congratulations, Sir Yu. You're a knight. You get a sword, maybe a pair of gilded spurs if your lord is feeling generous, or trying to offload some old bling. What you also get is the crushing weight of expectation, and more immediately, debt. That armor you've been fitted for? The upgraded weaponry? The slightly better horse you might now be entitled to? None of it is free. It's like getting your diploma, only instead of student loans, you have armorers and horse traders breathing down your neck. Your noble status just upgraded to nobly and hawk up to your eyeballs. Let's talk about that shining armor. In the movies, it looks majestic, flexible, almost comfortable. Ha! The reality of 14th century plate armor, or even a comprehensive coat of mail with some plate reinforcement, is that you're basically a walking, clanking oven in summer and an icebox in winter. It's incredibly heavy. We're talking 50, 60 pounds, maybe more, distributed unevenly. Movement is restricted. Getting up if you fall is a spectator sport. And basic bodily functions? Let's just say medieval plumbing wasn't advanced, and armor design priorities did not include convenient bathroom breaks. You quickly learn to plan your entire day around a complex and often desperate bladder management strategy. Then there's the upkeep of this glorious metal prison. Your life literally depends on every buckle, strap, and rivet. Rust is your nemesis, a creeping orange death to your expensive protection. You'll spend hours, or rather, your new squire, if you get one and can afford him, will spend hours, scouring, oiling, and repairing. Leather straps dry and crack. Links in your mail can break or get bent. Dents from enthusiastic training partners, or actual enemies, gulp, need to be hammered out. It's less knight in shining armor and more janitor for a very temperamental robot suit. Forget about a quick change. Getting dressed and undressed is a team effort, and your noble steed, your war horse, not just any old nag. This is a highly trained, powerful animal bred for war, and it costs a fortune. Seriously, you could buy a small village for the price of a top-tier destrier. It needs constant feeding. Oats, not just grass if you want. Performance, grooming, shoeing, and training. It's another mouth to feed, another major expense, and another thing you have to worry about getting killed from under you. Sure, it's impressive, but it's also a four-legged money pit that can be surprisingly temperamental. Sometimes you'll swear it understands the concept of irony, especially when it throws you into a mud puddle in front of someone important. Your first nightly duties are probably not what you imagined. No dragons to slay, no damsels in immediate, picturesque distress. More likely you're on escort duty for a traveling merchant caravan, because bandits are a thing, a very real and unpleasant thing. Or part of a retinue for your lord attending some tedious feudal council where everyone argues about land boundaries and whose hunting dogs are superior. You might be tasked with keeping the peace in a village, which usually means glowering at peasants until they stop bickering over a chicken. It's all deeply unglamorous. Your heroic pose is mostly just trying to look like you're not bored out of your skull. What about the legendary feasts and castle life? Well, if you're in your lord's direct household and not on campaign, yes, there are feasts. But the food, while plentiful for the nobles, can be an acquired taste. Lots of roasted meat, often gamey, heavily spiced to hide the fact it might be a bit past its prime. And if you're on campaign, or garrisoned somewhere, remote, get ready for hardtack that could break your teeth. Salted meat that's more salt than meat. And whatever you can forage. Your 5-star accommodation is often a leaky tent shared with several other knights who snore like enraged bears, or a bedbug-ridden bunk in some dreary frontier castle. You quickly realize that knighthood isn't a destination. It's a grueling, relentless lifestyle. The shine wears off faster than the cheap paint on a fairground trinket. It's an existence defined by discomfort, expense, constant low-level anxiety, and the ever-present possibility of a violent, messy end. Your band of brothers often feels more like a therapy group for the chronically overdressed and underpaid. You're not just a warrior, you're a walking, talking, clanking symbol of a system that values your ability to hit things with other things over pretty much anything else. Still think it's glamorous? We're just getting started. Ah, the code of chivalry. That magnificent, ill-defined, and spectacularly inconvenient set of rules you're now supposed to live by. It sounds so noble in the songs the minstrels warble, usually off-key after too much ale. Protect the weak. Unless, of course, the weak are peasants whose hovels are inconveniently located in the path of your lord's latest territorial dispute. Then, oops, uphold justice, which often means your lord's version of justice, which can be remarkably flexible. Honor ladies, preferably from a very safe distance, by writing terrible poetry or dedicating your next near-death experience in a tournament to them. They, in turn, are expected to look decorative and not cause too much trouble. You're supposed to be brave, courteous, pious, and loyal, all while encumbered by 60 pounds of metal and the constant nagging suspicion that most other knights are just making it up as they go along too. It's less a rigid code and more a set of vague suggestions that everyone agrees sound nice, but are a nightmare to actually implement. Especially when someone's actively trying to separate your head from your shoulders. Your medieval moral compass is basically a weather vane in a hurricane. But surely, there are perks. Tournaments. Yes. The medieval equivalent of a demolition derby meets a rock concert, with you as both the car and the guitarist. This is your chance to shine, to demonstrate your martial prowess in front of cheering crowds, and, most importantly, ladies who might bestow upon you a token, a scarf, a ribbon, maybe even a slightly used handkerchief, to tie to your lance. The pageantry is immense. Colorful banners, heralds announcing your incredibly long and mostly made-up lineage, and feasting that goes on for days. You get to practice your jousting, your melee skills, which is basically a giant armored mosh, pit with swords, and your ability to look heroic while nearly getting impaled. Of course, tournament injuries are legendary. Broken bones, concussions, occasionally a swift trip to the afterlife. It's all part of the fun. And that special tournament armor, often even fancier and more restrictive than your regular kit. Guess who's footing the bill for that, and for the multiple war horses you might go through? It's a high-stakes game of look at me, where the grand prize is bragging rights and a limp. Your knightly duties extend beyond the glorious, and often, muddy field of battle or the equally muddy tournament ground. As a man of standing, or at least a man with a pointy helmet and a sharp sword, you might be called upon to administer justice in your local area, especially if your lord can't be bothered. This doesn't mean you get a cool wig and a gavel. It means listening to endless disputes between villagers about stolen pigs, encroached fence lines, or whose turn it is to use the communal dung heap. You're expected to make wise Solomon-like judgments, often with little actual evidence beyond, he said, she said, and the pig looks shifty. Failure to resolve things could lead to feuds that simmer for generations. Sometimes, enforcing the law just means showing up with a few armed retainers and looking sufficiently menacing until everyone agrees to shut up and go home. Your legal training amounts to knowing which end of the sword to point at the uncooperative. And then there's the delightful world of feudal politics. It's a snake pit, plain and simple. Being a knight isn't just about your personal prowess. It's about who you're sworn to. Your lord has allies, enemies, and a whole host of frenemies. You need to navigate this treacherous landscape with care. Attend court, laugh at your lord's terrible jokes, offer sage advice, but not so sage that you outshine him, and generally try to make yourself useful without making yourself a target. Fealty is a big deal, but loyalties can shift like sand. A powerful baron might rebel against the king, and suddenly your oath to your lord puts you on the wrong side of a very big, very angry royal army. Choose your allegiances wisely, because the medieval equivalent of an unfriend request often involves a siege engine and a demand for unconditional surrender. Your social climbing is less about charm and more about not accidentally pledging yourself to next week's traitor. Forget the epic clashes you've heard about in sagas, at least for now. Your early experiences of warfare are likely to be far less glamorous. Think cattle raids across a disputed border, where the main objective is stealing livestock and burning a few peasant huts to make a point. Or perhaps a lovely, tedious siege, where you spend weeks, maybe months, camped outside a castle in miserable weather, slowly starving along with the defenders, punctuated by occasional terrifying skirmishes, or the joy of plague sweeping through your camp. You might be called to hunt down bandits, who are often just desperate peasants or demobilized soldiers with nothing left to lose, and a talent for ambush. These aren't the glorious charges of song. This is brutal, messy, and often pointless violence, where the main skills are stealth, cruelty, and the ability to live in squalor for extended periods. Your first taste of action is usually just a masterclass in organized thuggery. All this, the constant threat of violence, the political maneuvering, the sheer physical discomfort, starts to take its toll. Garrison duty in some isolated border tower is mind-numbingly boring, broken only by the occasional alarm that usually turns out to be a badger. The romantic notions of chivalry and glorious combat begin to fray, replaced by a grim pragmatism. You find yourself assessing terrain, not for its beauty, but for its ambush potential. You eye strangers not with curiosity, but with suspicion. Sleep becomes lighter. Every unfamiliar sound is a potential threat. The minstrels don't sing about the knight who wakes up screaming from nightmares, or the one who drinks himself into a stupor to forget the things he's seen and done. There's no medieval term for PTSD, so you just tell yourself you're battle-hardened, while the tremor in your hand as you lift your ale tells a different story. This illustrious career is starting to feel like a very long, very dark tunnel. Forget those petty squabbles and bandit hunts. This is the big one. Your liege lord has decided to engage in some serious, large-scale unpleasantness with a neighboring rival, or perhaps the king himself has called his banners for a glorious, foreign adventure, which usually means invading somewhere that doesn't want you there. The call to arms echoes through the land. This is what all that training, all that expense was for, right? The minstrels sing of brave knights eagerly, answering the summons, polishing their helms with a song on their lips. The reality? You're frantically trying to gather your retainers, if you have any, and if they haven't deserted. Check if your armor has developed any new and exciting rust patches, and argue with your squire about how many whetstones are too many whetstones to pack. You also need to make sure your affairs are vaguely in order, because there's a very decent chance you won't be coming back, or at least not in one piece. The logistics are a medieval special, ensuring enough food for men and horses, a constant, losing battle. Finding blacksmiths to repair damaged gear on the move, and trying to decipher your lord's grand strategy, which seems to mainly involve pointing vaguely at a map and saying, "We go there." Probably. Your epic quest begins not with a noble charge, but with a profound sense of impending doom and a desperate search for a waterproof cloak. Life on the march. Oh, the sheer, unadulterated joy of it. Imagine your worst ever camping trip, then multiply it by 1,000, remove all modern conveniences, and add the constant threat of violent death. You'll spend weeks, maybe months, slogging across the countryside. If you're lucky, there's a semblance of a road, probably rutted and muddy. If you're unlucky, you're blazing a trail through forests, over hills, and across bogs that seem specifically designed to swallow horses whole. You're either riding your expensive warhorse, trying to conserve its energy for actual battle, meaning you get exhausted from the constant motion and chafing, or you're walking beside it, caked in dust or mud depending on the season. The scenery might be nice if you weren't so focused on not twisting an ankle or wondering where your next non-contaminated drink of water is coming from. Food is a monotonous rotation of whatever could be looted, foraged, or preserved. Stale bread, questionable salted meat, and if you're really lucky, some half-cooked beans that will introduce you to new levels of intestinal distress. Your band of brothers is mostly a column of tired, smelly, and increasingly irritable men. You're not striding purposefully towards glory. You're trudging towards an uncertain future, one miserable footstep at a time. Welcome to camp life. The medieval equivalent of a poorly managed music festival set up in a swamp, but with more sharp objects and significantly worse sanitation. Thousands of men, horses, oxen, and various hangers-on, cooks, merchants, blacksmiths, and a surprising number of people whose job description is simply loiter menacingly, are all crammed together in a sprawling, chaotic mess of tents, lean-tos, and open fires. The latrines, if they can be dignified with such a name, are usually just hastily dug trenches, strategically located upwind if you're unlucky, or, more often, everywhere. Personal hygiene becomes a distant, cherished memory. You share your cramped, leaky tent, if you even rate a tent, with other knights who probably snore, pass gas with alarming frequency, and have very different ideas about what constitutes clean. And disease. Oh, the diseases. Dysentery, the infamous bloody flux, will likely be your most constant companion, laying low more soldiers than any enemy weapon. Typhus, trench fever, and all sorts of delightful infections spread like gossip. It's a petri dish of medieval pathogens, and your immune system, bless its cotton socks, is about to get the work out of its life, or death. Then, the thrilling news. The enemy is near. Or at least a scout who managed to survive swears he saw some hostile banners over the next hill. Suddenly, the weary lethargy of the march is replaced by a jolt of adrenaline mixed with pure, unadulterated terror. The camp buzzes with a nervous energy. Armor is donned, not for practice this time, but with the grim understanding that it might soon be tested by something much harder than a wooden practice sword. Weapons are sharpened with a new fervor. You're sent out on patrols, or you stand. Guard duty for hours on end, peering into the darkness, every rustle of leaves sounding like an approaching army. Skirmishes erupt as scouting parties clash. Brief, brutal encounters that serve as a nasty appetizer for the main course. Sleep becomes a luxury you can't afford, and when you do drift off, it's filled with anxious dreams of flashing steel, and your own untimely demise. The bravado you might have felt back in your lord's feasting hall now feels like a distant, foolish memory. This is it. The moment where all that talk, all that training, gets real. And real in the 1300s usually means someone's about to have a very, very bad day. It's the eve of battle. The camp is quieter now, a heavy blanket of anticipation smothering the usual noise. Commanders walk among the troops, offering rousing speeches about God, glory, and the perfidy of the enemy. You try to listen, but their words are mostly lost in the frantic thumping of your own heart. Men huddle around fires, some boasting, some praying, some just staring blankly into the flames, lost in their own thoughts. Priests move through the ranks, hearing hasty confessions from soldiers convinced they won't see another dawn. You run a whetstone along the edge of your sword, more for something to do with your trembling hands than because it actually needs more sharpening. You check your armor straps for the 10th time. Maybe you dictate a quick will to a literate companion, leaving your second-best boots to your squire and your meager savings to your bewildered family, hoping someone remembers to tell them you died bravely. The camaraderie is thick, not with cheer, but with a shared understanding of the horror that awaits. Sleep is impossible. All you can do is wait for the sun to rise on what might be the last day of your illustrious, and probably very short, knightly career. This isn't an adventure anymore. It's a terrifying appointment with destiny. And destiny in the 1300s often wields a very big, very sharp axe. The wretched, sleepless night is finally over, replaced by a cold, gray dawn that promises nothing good. This is it. The day you find out if all those years of being whacked with wooden swords and falling off horses were worth anything more than a lifetime of back pain. You're helped into your armor, each buckle and strap feeling like another nail in your potential coffin. You try to eat something, but your stomach is doing acrobatics that would impress a contortionist. You line up with your fellow knights and men-at-arms, a vast, intimidating mass of steel and nervous sweat. Banners snap in the wind, a pathetic attempt at cheerfulness in the face of organized slaughter. Horns blare, their mournful calls drowned out by the shouting of commanders and the nervous neighing of horses. And then you see them, the enemy line, stretching across the field. They no longer look like abstract political opponents. They look like a terrifyingly large number of individuals who have woken up with the express purpose of ending your existence. Your mouth is dry, your palms are slick inside your gauntlets, and every instinct is screaming at you to run in the opposite direction. The priest mumbles a final generic blessing. This isn't a noble pageant. It's the terrifying precipice of industrialized homicide 1300 style. If you're part of the mounted cavalry, the order comes. Charge. This is the moment you've supposedly trained for. The thunderous advance of knights that's meant to shatter enemy formations and win eternal glory. The reality is a jarring, deafening, and utterly terrifying experience. Your horse, itself probably terrified, surges forward, the ground trembling under hundreds of hooves. You lower your lance, aiming for that tiny spot on an enemy shield, or breastplate, all while bouncing around like a rag doll in a metal suit. The wind screams past your helmet slits, limiting your vision to a narrow, rapidly approaching panorama of pointy things. For a few brief, eternal seconds, there's a strange clarity, a sense of unstoppable momentum. Then comes the impact, a horrific, bone-jarring crash as lances connect with shields and bodies, splintering into 1,000 pieces. Horses scream, men yell, and the discipline line dissolves into a chaotic mess. If you're in the infantry, your experience is no less charming. A slow, dreadful trudge forward, often uphill, into a sleet of enemy arrows. You huddle behind your shield, listening to the thud of bolts hitting wood and flesh around you, praying your number isn't up. Your heroic advance feels more like being voluntarily fed into a giant medieval wood chipper. Welcome to the melee, the heart of the medieval battle, and a place where all romantic notions of chivalry go to die a swift, brutal death. This isn't a series of elegant one-on-one duels like in the ballads. It's a heaving, struggling, screaming mass of men, hacking, stabbing, and bludgeoning each other with desperate ferocity. The noise is overwhelming. The clang of sword on armor, the sickening thud of mace on helmet, the guttural roars of exertion, and the high-pitched screams of the wounded and dying. Visibility is almost zero, choked by dust, smoke from any fires, and the press of bodies. You can barely swing your weapon without hitting one of your own men. The ground underfoot is slick with mud and blood, making every step treacherous. Your 60 pounds of armor, which felt so cumbersome on the march, now feels like the only thing keeping your insides in. You fight on pure adrenaline and instinct, your carefully practiced techniques forgotten in the desperate scramble to stay alive. Friend and foe become a blur of flailing limbs and grunting, sweating faces. Honor? Fair play? The only rule here is to kill or be killed, and try not to trip over a disemboweled corpse while you're at it. And the wounds. Gods. The wounds. Medieval weapons were designed for one purpose: to inflict catastrophic damage on the human body, armored or not. You see arrows with barbed heads punch through mail and leather as if they were paper, their tips specifically designed to be impossible to remove cleanly. Swords and axes leave gaping, horrific gashes, severing limbs and spilling guts onto the blood-soaked earth. Maces and warhammers, the favored tools for dealing with armored opponents, don't cut. They crush, shattering bone, rupturing organs, and turning helmets into death traps for the unfortunate wearers. There are no paramedics rushing to your side, no sterile operating rooms, no morphine to dull the agony. If you go down, you might lie there for hours, bleeding out, screaming for help that will never come, or until a camp follower looking for loot mercifully, or not so mercifully, finishes you off. Infection is almost a certainty for any open wound. Even a minor injury, a broken arm or a deep cut, could easily mean a slow, agonizing death days or weeks later. You witness firsthand the fragility of the human body and the brutal efficiency of medieval killing tools. If you're still standing as the tide of battle turns, or as exhaustion and casualties force a lull, the scene around you is one of utter devastation. One side might break and rout, leading to a chaotic pursuit where even more slaughter occurs, as fleeing men are cut down from behind. Or, the fighting might simply peter out as both sides become too battered and weary to continue. The field is a charnel house, littered with the dead and dying, twisted corpses of men and horses piled haphazardly. The air is thick with the stench of blood, sweat, excrement, and fear. Those who can still walk stumble around in a daze, searching for comrades, looting the fallen, stripping armor and valuables from friend and foe alike was standard practice. Can't let good steel go to waste, right? Or simply trying to comprehend the horror they've just participated in. There's no triumphant cheering, no glorious fanfares, just an overwhelming sense of shock, a bone-deep weariness, and the hollow, ringing silence that follows intense, prolonged noise. You've survived. For today. The glory you were promised feels suspiciously like nausea and a desperate urge to find somewhere, anywhere, quiet and safe. But the war, your lord will soon remind you, is likely far from over. So, the screaming has mostly stopped, replaced by the groans of the wounded and the eerie silence of the dead. The battle is over, but the horror is just entering a new phase. If you're on the winning side, congratulations, you get the dubious honor of battlefield cleanup. This isn't about neatly stacking bodies. It's about identifying who's actually dead, who's merely dying, and who's valuable enough to take prisoner. You'll be wading through a nightmarish landscape of carnage, the ground soaked with blood and littered with broken weapons, discarded armor, and the mangled remains of men and horses. The stench of death, blood, and emptied bowels is a physical assault on your senses, a perfume that will cling to your memory long after you've scrubbed your skin raw. If you're wounded yourself, good luck. You might get some rough first aid, a dirty rag tied around a bleeding limb, maybe a swig of potent, unrefined alcohol if someone's feeling generous. Mostly, you're on your own, trying to assess the damage and hoping it's not as bad as it feels. If you're on the losing side and still mobile, you're running, hiding, or feigning death, praying that the victors are too busy looting to notice one more twitching body. Your heroic survival is now a desperate scramble in a human abattoir. Let's say you've sustained a treatable wound, perhaps a nasty gash that isn't immediately fatal, or an arrow you'd quite like removed from your person. Welcome to the wonderful world of 14th century medical care. Your best hope is a barber surgeon, a chap whose expertise usually involves cutting hair, pulling teeth, and performing amputations with the same set of unsterilized tools. Anesthesia? That's for weaklings, and largely unavailable beyond copious amounts of alcohol or a knock on the head. If that arrow needs removing, it'll be yanked out, barbs and all, or pushed through, depending on which method is deemed likely to cause slightly less immediate screaming. Wounds are often cauterized with a red-hot iron to stop bleeding, searing flesh, and leaving you with an even more agonizing injury that's now beautifully sealed for infection. Poultices made of bread mold, dung, or cobwebs might be applied, based on theories that make astrology look like hard science. Sickness and infection are the real victors of most medieval battles. That glorious wound you received defending the banner, it's far more likely to kill you slowly and painfully in a fever-ridden tent days later than the enemy sword that inflicted it. Your chances of recovery often depend more on sheer luck and a robust constitution than any medical intervention. Now, about those prisoners. This is where the grim business of war meets medieval economics. If you're a common soldier on the losing side, your prospects are bleak. You might be killed outright to save on rations and trouble, or perhaps enslaved, if there's a market for it. But if you're a knight or a nobleman, ding ding ding, you're a walking, talking sack of potential silver. Your captors will assess your armor, your heraldry, and your general demeanor to estimate your ransom value. Then begins the delightful, process of being held captive, often in squalid conditions, poorly fed and under constant guard, while messengers haggle with your family back home. This could take months, even years. Your loved ones might have to sell land, heirlooms, or plunge themselves into crippling debt to secure your release. And if you're the captor of a valuable enemy, it's a potential windfall, but also a responsibility. You have to feed your prize, keep him from escaping or dying of neglect, which would rather spoil the profit margin, and negotiate his ransom, a process fraught with its own complexities and potential for bad faith. The chivalric ideal of mercy to a fallen foe often translated into a very practical assessment of their net worth. Your honor is directly proportional to your family's bank account. The spoils of war. If your side was victorious, there's an opportunity for some officially sanctioned, or at least widely tolerated, looting. This isn't just picking up a discarded sword on the battlefield. It can mean the systematic pillaging of the enemy's camp, or, if the campaign continues, nearby towns and villages that were allied with your defeated foe. Homes are ransacked, valuables taken, livestock driven off. It's a brutal, chaotic affair, often accompanied by violence against civilians who are unlucky enough to be in the way. As a knight, you're expected to lead your men, and you'll get a larger share of any significant plunder. But the line between a conquering hero and a common brigand becomes perilously thin. You might acquire some silver, some fine cloth, or a decent piece of armor from a fallen enemy, but you'll also witness, and perhaps participate in, acts that sit uneasily with those knightly vows you once took so seriously. The screams of the dispossessed, the fear in the eyes of the conquered. These become part of your campaign memories, a dark counterpoint to any tales of battlefield glory. That dented silver goblet you liberated, it might not seem so shiny when you remember how it was acquired. Finally, you limp back to your main camp, or what's left of it, or perhaps begin the long, weary journey home if the campaign is truly at an end. If you were victorious, there's a grim satisfaction, but it's usually tempered by the staggering cost. You count the faces of your comrades, noting the many who are missing, the many more who are wounded. The elation of survival quickly gives way to exhaustion and a hollow ache. Feasts might be held, toasts made to the fallen, but the shadow of the battlefield lingers. If you were defeated, the mood is even more dire. Shame, fear of punishment or further attacks, and the bitter knowledge of your lord's displeasure weigh heavily. The retreat itself can be as dangerous as the battle, hounded by the enemy, struggling with broken morale and dwindling supplies. Whether victor or vanquished, you are changed. The world is no longer a place of abstract honor and glory. It's a place of visceral, unforgettable brutality. The war might be over for now, but its echoes will resonate in your nightmares for years to come. Your illustrious career has indelibly marked you, and not with noble scars, but with the deep, invisible wounds of having stared into the abyss. So, the war is over, for now, or your particular lord has decided to take a break from actively trying to get everyone killed. What does peacetime look like for you? A seasoned knight, probably nursing a few new scars and a deeply ingrained distrust of sudden, loud noises? Don't picture idyllic scenes of retirement tending a rose garden. If you're lucky, you might have some lands to return to, a small manor or estate granted for your services. More likely, especially if you're a younger or less distinguished knight, you're stuck in garrison duty. Imagine the thrill. Months, perhaps years, spent in some remote, crumbling border castle, staring at the same bleak landscape, with the same equally bored and irritable companions. The highlights of your week are weapons practice, because you never know when the peace will abruptly end. Inspecting the latrine ditches, and trying to prevent your men from murdering each other out of sheer monotony. Your armor still needs to be kept free of rust, your weapons sharp. Peace isn't a vacation, it's just a different, more tedious kind of vigilance. You're not so much at peace, as on standby in the medieval equivalent of a waiting room with terrible Wi-Fi and a constant draft. If you are one of the knights fortunate enough to possess land, welcome to the exciting world of medieval estate management. You thought commanding men in battle was tough? Try dealing with surly peasants who are convinced you're going to tax them into oblivion, and you probably are, because maintaining your knightly lifestyle is expensive. Your fields are subject to drought, flood, blight, and swarms of locusts that apparently didn't get the memo about peacetime. Your manor house, if you can call it that, is likely a drafty, poorly lit stone building with a leaky roof and a chronic rat infestation. You need to understand crop rotation, or find someone who does and hope they're not cheating you. Oversee repairs to buildings and fences, dispense local justice, more pig disputes, and constantly worry about your neighbors encroaching on your land or worse, challenging your right to it. Forget chivalric romances. Your days are filled with agricultural anxieties and the thrilling complexities of feudal land tenure. Your castle is less a symbol of power and more a giant, crumbling money pit that smells faintly of mildew and regret. You quickly learn that a well-aimed lance is useless against a plague of weevils in your grain stores. And what about affairs of the heart? As a knight, particularly one with some land or prospects, you're expected to marry. This isn't about finding your soulmate over a candlelit dinner. This is a strategic and financial transaction, pure and simple. Your family or your lord will be on the lookout for a suitable match. A lady from a good family, hopefully with a substantial dowry in cash, land, or political connections that can bolster your own precarious position. Her feelings on the matter, and indeed yours, are secondary if considered at all. Courtship, such as it is, involves stilted, heavily chaperoned conversations, the exchange of formal gifts, a prized hawk perhaps, or a piece of slightly used but still serviceable armor from your last campaign, and a great deal of scrutiny from both families. You're not looking for love, you're looking for good breeding stock and an advantageous alliance. Your medieval dating profile would read, battle-scarred knight, owns own sword, and, possibly mortgaged, patch of dirt. Seeks politically advantageous union with heiress of negotiable attractiveness. Must tolerate snoring and occasional night terrors. Romance is a luxury few knights can afford, or even comprehend. The years start to take their toll. Those wounds you picked up in your glorious youth ache with a vengeance every time the weather changes. That arrow you took in the leg makes you limp, especially on cold mornings. The constant stress, the poor diet on campaign, and the sheer physical exertion of wearing armor and wielding heavy weapons have aged you beyond your years. Your hearing might be shot from too many hours spent near siege engines or in the clamor of battle. Mentally, you're not much better off. The faces of men you killed, or comrades you lost, might visit you in your quieter moments. You might drink more than you should, seeking solace at the bottom of an ale jug. The boisterous camaraderie of the feasting hall can feel hollow when you're surrounded by younger, more idealistic knights who haven't yet seen what you've seen. Religion might offer some comfort, or it might just feel like another set of rules you're failing to live up to. You are, in essence, slowly falling apart. A once proud war machine succumbing to the rust and wear of a life lived too hard, too fast, and too violently. Your shiniest piece of kit is now probably a collection of well-earned anxieties, and just when you've settled into a routine of sorts, be it the mind-numbing boredom of garrison duty, the frustrating toil of your estate, or the awkward silences of your politically expedient marriage, the horns blow again. A new king has a new ambition. An old feud flares up with renewed bitterness. Some damn fool noble has decided that his particular patch of mud is worth shedding blood over. Your lord summons his banners, and you, Sir Knight, are once again called upon to drag your aging, aching body into that familiar suit of metal. The brief illusion of peace shatters. Any thoughts of a quiet retirement, perhaps teaching your probably terrified children how to avoid getting skewered, evaporate. This is the rhythm of your life. Long stretches of grinding discomfort and anxiety, punctuated by short, terrifying bursts of extreme violence. There is no golden parachute, no nightly pension plan beyond hoping you don't die too horribly in the next engagement. So you sigh, sharpen your sword, and prepare to ride. Out once more, because that, in the glorious 1300s, is what a knight does. Until he can't anymore. Against all odds, you've survived. You've outlasted fevers, battles, treacherous political rivals, and countless near-death experiences that would give a modern stuntman nightmares. You are now officially old by 14th century standards, which could mean anything from your late 40s onwards if you've been particularly unlucky with the mileage, or perhaps even your 50s if you're some sort of medical marvel. Your body is a creaking, aching testament to a life lived violently. A roadmap of poorly healed bones, nagging pains from old wounds, and joints that predict the weather with more accuracy than any court astrologer. That once proud suit of armor now feels like it weighs a literal ton, and getting into it requires the assistance of 2 strong squires and a liberal amount of groaning, mostly from you. On the training ground, the younger knights, full of a foolish bravado you vaguely remember possessing yourself, now run rings around you. In council, your advice, once heeded as the wisdom of a seasoned warrior, is now often politely ignored as the ramblings of an old man stuck in the past. You're not quite a revered elder statesman. You're more like that old piece of furniture everyone's too sentimental to throw out, but also secretly wishes wasn't taking up so much space. Your glory days are now just stories you tell to anyone too polite to walk away. The world, inconsiderately, hasn't stopped changing while you've been busy getting old and accumulating scars. Warfare itself is slowly, almost imperceptibly, beginning to shift. Those massed ranks of longbowmen, like the English used with such devastating effect at Crécy and Poitiers, are proving that a well-aimed arrow from a trained commoner can fell the noblest, most expensively armored knight. Early forms of gunpowder weapons are starting to appear on battlefields, crude and unreliable, yes, but hinting at a future where personal valor and heavy plate might not be the deciding factors. Sieges are becoming more scientific, less about heroic assaults and more about engineering and artillery. The old ways, your ways, of mounted charges and individual combat prowess, while still important, are no longer the undisputed kings of the battlefield. You look at some of the newer, more efficient methods of killing, and a part of you, the part that isn't just tired and sore, feels a sense of unease. Your entire life has been dedicated to a particular brand of warfare, and now the rules of the game are subtly changing, threatening to make you, Sir Knight, a magnificent, expensive, and increasingly obsolete relic. If the battlefield doesn't claim you in one last ill-advised charge, then the myriad joys of medieval old age are waiting patiently in the wings. Forget graceful retirement communities or attentive nursing care. You're likely still in that same drafty castle or manor house, your world shrinking as your mobility decreases. Your teeth, if you have any left, are probably a source of constant agony. Your eyesight might be failing, making even the simple pleasure of watching the rain impossible. Gout, that rich man's disease born of a diet heavy in meat and ale, could turn your joints into throbbing torture devices. Chronic infections from those old, glorious wounds can flare up, leaving you bedridden and feverish for weeks. There's no social security, no pension plan beyond what meager income your lands, if any, might still provide, or the charity of your lord or family, who might be less charitable and more impatiently waiting for you to vacate your prime spot by the fire. Every cough, every new ache, brings with it the chilling reminder of your own mortality, not in a blaze of glory, but in a slow, undignified decline. Your final battle is against your own decaying body, and it's a fight you're guaranteed to lose. So, what is your legacy, Sir Knight? After a lifetime of bloodshed, discomfort, and questionable choices, you've certainly left your mark, mostly in the form of scars on yourself and others, and perhaps a few dents in the family fortune from all those ransoms and armor repairs. If you were particularly famous or infamous, your name might be mentioned in a chronicle or two, probably misspelled. A minstrel might even compose a rather terrible song about your most notable exploit, conveniently omitting all the mud, blood, and existential dread. Your children, if you have them, will inherit your lands and your debts, and perhaps a sword you once wielded. They'll also inherit the same brutal, unforgiving world you navigated, unless they're smart enough to go into the clergy or learn a useful trade, like barrel making. Those lofty chivalric ideals you were taught as a boy, honor, valor, piety, justice, how do they stack up against the grim reality of what you've done and seen? Was it all worth it, this lifelong pursuit of a warrior's renown? As you sit by the fire, wrapped in furs, listening to the wind howl outside, the answer that echoes in the silence of your own heart is probably a resounding, regretful no. Few knights of the 1300s died peacefully in their sleep, surrounded by adoring grandchildren quoting their wisest sayings. More likely, your end comes in a less picturesque fashion. Perhaps it's a final, pointless skirmish over some forgotten piece of land, where your aging reflexes betray you. Maybe it's a winter fever that finally overwhelms your weakened constitution in that drafty stone room. Or perhaps you simply fade away, forgotten and irrelevant, as a new generation of warriors with new ways of fighting takes center stage. There's no grand funeral with a sorrowful kingdom in mourning, just a quiet burial in the local churchyard. Your name perhaps carved crudely onto a stone that will be worn smooth by time and weather. Your lasting contribution? You were one more armored cog in the great grinding machine of medieval warfare. Your final thought, as the light fades, might just be a wistful regret for all those years you could have spent learning a sensible craft, like carpentry, or perhaps just enjoying a warm bath without the fear of imminent attack. So much for chivalry. Suddenly, your 21st century problems, that slow internet, the disappointing season finale of your favorite show, they don't seem so bad after all, do they? You can sleep now. You've earned it. All right, deep breaths. If you thought being a perpetually indebted, frequently terrified, and ultimately disposable knight in the 1300s was a raw deal, oh boy, have I got a downgrade for you. Wipe the slate clean. Forget castles, destriers, and even the faint possibility of a slightly less rancid meal. Welcome to the actual majority experience of the Middle Ages. You, my friend, have just been born a peasant. Congratulations. You've officially won the medieval lottery for backbreaking. Labor, zero social mobility, and a life expectancy that makes a fruit fly look like a long-term planner. The 1300s are about to get personal. And by personal, I mean intimately acquainted with dirt, disease, and soul-crushing despair. No dramatic quests or chivalric codes here. Your main quest is to survive until Tuesday. And your code is, try not to die of dysentery before the harvest. Let's start with your grand entrance into this world. You're not born in a sterilized hospital wing, nor even in a moderately clean bed in a knight's drafty manor. No, you make your debut on a pile of straw, probably lice-ridden, on the packed dirt floor of a one-room hovel. Your mother, bless her exhausted soul, has likely been toiling in the fields until the day before, and she'll be back at it a few days after, because starvation doesn't take maternity leave. A local midwife, whose medical knowledge consists mainly of folk remedies and a healthy dose of superstition, might be present, her hands as grimy as the floor. Your first breath isn't of fresh air, but of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and the faint, lingering aroma of whatever animal shared the hut with your family last winter to prevent it from freezing or being stolen. This isn't just humble beginnings. This is starting life several rungs below the bottom of the ladder in a mud pit. Your new home, your entire world for the foreseeable future, is a masterpiece of medieval minimalist misery. Picture a small, cramped hut, often just a single room, constructed from wattle and daub. That's twigs and mud, for the uninitiated. Or rough-hewn timber, with a thatched roof that's a haven for rodents and leaks like a sieve every time it rains, which is often. The floor? Dirt. Packed earth, to be precise. Cold in winter, damp most of the year, and an excellent breeding ground for fleas and other uninvited guests. Windows are a luxury you can't afford. If you have any, they're tiny, unglazed slits in the wall, more for letting out some of the perpetual smoke than for letting in light or, heaven forbid, a pleasant view. The view is probably just more mud anyway. Furniture is rudimentary. Rough wooden table perhaps, a few stools if you're lucky, and a communal sleeping area that might be a slightly raised platform covered in more straw, shared by your entire family. Privacy is a concept that hasn't been invented yet for your social class. Your interior design aesthetic is early squalor, with functional filth as its guiding principle. Now, let's talk hygiene, or rather, the spectacular lack thereof. Bathing? An annual event if you're particularly fastidious and live near a river that isn't too polluted, and if it's warm enough not to give you fatal pneumonia. Otherwise, a quick wipe with a damp rag, if you own a rag, is about as good. As it gets, water is a precious commodity, laboriously fetched from the village well or stream, and it's primarily for drinking, after you've let the sediment settle, hopefully, and for cooking your meager pottage. Soap is a distant dream. Your toilet facilities? A designated patch behind the hut, or perhaps a communal refuse pit for the village if it's a more organized hellhole. More often, it's just wherever. The concept of sanitation is as alien as a smartphone. As a result, you, your family, and everyone you know are walking ecosystems of parasites. Lice are your constant companions, nestled snugly in your unwashed hair and clothes. Fleas treat you like a mobile buffet. Worms are an internal reality. The air you breathe is a rich tapestry of odors. Unwashed humanity, animal waste. Because animals often live cheek by jowl with people, sometimes even inside. Rotting refuse, and the ever-present acrid wood smoke from the open hearth that serves for cooking and a meager source of heat. You don't just live with dirt. You are fundamentally composed of it. Your modern obsession with hand sanitizer would cause you to have a complete nervous breakdown within 5 minutes of arriving, and the food, or more accurately, the relentless, gnawing hunger that will be your lifelong companion. Forget 3 square meals a day. You're lucky if you get 1 or 2, and they'll be monotonous and meager. The staple of your diet is bread, not the fluffy, artisanal sourdough you pay a fortune for today, but coarse, dark, heavy bread made from rye or barley, often gritty with millstone dust. If the harvest was bad, it might be bulked out with beans, peas, or even ground acorns. Accompanying this will be pottage, a thin, watery stew of whatever vegetables are in season. Turnips, onions, cabbage if you're lucky, simmered for hours over the fire. Meat is a rare treat, a whisper, a rumor. Perhaps some scraps of bacon. If your family keeps a pig, or if your father manages to poach a rabbit or a bird from the Lord's forest without getting caught. A crime punishable by mutilation or death. Your main source of protein is likely peas and beans. Dairy, like milk or cheese, is also scarce and seasonal. You'll drink weak, watery ale, not for enjoyment, but because it's often safer than the water. Malnutrition isn't a risk, it's your default state, stunting your growth and leaving you vulnerable to every passing ailment. You dream not of riches or adventure, but of a full belly. That organic, gluten-free, ethically sourced kale salad you had for lunch? Your medieval peasant self would weep with joy over a single, slightly wilted cabbage leaf. If you survive the perilous first few years of infancy, and many don't, with infant and child mortality rates being terrifyingly high, your childhood is less a period of innocent play and more an accelerated apprenticeship in suffering. There are no toys, no colorful picture books, no playgrounds. School is an absurd fantasy. As soon as you can walk and follow basic instructions, you're put to work. Your tiny hands will be busy scaring birds away from the precious crops, gathering firewood from the dwindling nearby woods, careful not to trespass on the Lord's reserves, fetching water, weeding the garden patch, or looking after even younger siblings if your mother is toiling elsewhere. Dangers are everywhere. A kick from an ox, a tumble into the fire, a snake in the woodpile, or any number of childhood diseases for which there is no cure beyond a muttered prayer and perhaps a foul-tasting herbal concoction. Your parents, ground down by endless labor and the constant struggle for survival, probably love you in their own way, but they have little time or energy for cuddles or comfort. Your primary playmates are other, equally grimy, underfed children, and perhaps the family pig, if it hasn't been eaten yet. Your village is your entire universe. A small, huddled cluster of wretched huts like your own, surrounded by the vast, open fields you and your family will work until your backs break. The only substantial building is likely the stone church, a powerful symbol of God's authority and the church's wealth, a place of fear and obligation as much as comfort. Looming in the distance, or perhaps right next door if you're particularly unlucky, is the manor house of your lord, the owner of the land, your labor, and effectively, you. News from the outside world filters in slowly, if at all, usually via a traveling peddler or a soldier returning from some distant, incomprehensible war, and it's rarely good news. The muddy tracks that serve as roads connect you to other, equally miserable villages, but you'll likely never travel more than a few miles from your birthplace in your entire life. Your world is small, your horizons limited, and your prospects even tinier. You are born into a cycle of toil, and the chances of you ever breaking free are practically zero. This isn't just a tough start, it's a life sentence handed down at birth with no chance of parole. Welcome to your new, utterly unromantic reality. So, you've survived your precarious infancy and early childhood, a feat in itself. What does adult life, or what passes for it in your peasant world, hold in store? Prepare yourself for a routine so crushingly monotonous, so physically demanding, it makes your worst day at a modern office look like a spa retreat. Your life is governed by two unrelenting masters, the changing seasons and the even more unchanging demands of your feudal lord. Work begins before the sun even thinks about dragging itself over the horizon, and doesn't end until long after it has sunk back down, leaving you to stumble back to your hovel in the dark. Forget weekends. Forget paid vacations. Forget the concept of work-life balance. That's a luxurious fantasy several centuries and a couple of revolutions away. Your only respite comes from the occasional holy day, and even then, you're likely expected to attend lengthy church services, probably standing in a cold, damp building, listening to a sermon in Latin that you don't understand, reminding you of your inherent sinfulness and the joys of eternal damnation if you don't toe the line. This isn't a career path you've chosen. It's a hereditary sentence of hard labor, passed down from your equally unfortunate parents, with no hope of promotion, parole, or even a slightly more comfortable brand of suffering. Before we even get to the backbreaking specifics, let's clarify your status. You're most likely a serf. This doesn't mean you're a slave in the classical sense. You can't usually be sold individually away from the land. But make no mistake, you are not free. You are bound to the manor, tied to the patch of earth your lord graciously allows you to work. Leaving the manor without your lord's permission is a serious offense, often resulting in brutal punishment if you're caught and dragged back. And why would he give permission? You're a vital part of his agricultural workforce, his property, in all but name. Your primary obligation is week work, a set number of days each week, usually 3 but often more during busy seasons like harvest, spent toiling directly on the Lord's personal lands, his domain. All the produce from this labor goes straight to him. Then, from the meager strips of land you cultivate for your own family's survival, you owe him further dues, a share of your grain, some of your livestock, if you're lucky enough to own any, perhaps a few eggs, or a portion of the ale you brewed. The sheer injustice of it all, the relentless extraction of your energy and resources to keep a distant, probably disdainful noble in relative luxury, would be infuriating if you had the time or energy to contemplate it. But you don't. You just work. Powerlessness is the air you breathe. And what tools do you have for this endless toil? Forget an arsenal of shiny, ergonomically designed gardening implements from your local hardware superstore. Your tools are primitive, heavy, and brutally inefficient, seemingly designed to maximize your suffering along with the harvest. The plow, if your village is prosperous enough to have one shared amongst several families, is a cumbersome wooden beast, perhaps tipped with a little iron, that needs a team of straining oxen, which you also might have to share or borrow, just to scratch a furrow in the heavy, often clay-rich soil. You'll use a sickle, a short, curved blade, for reaping grain, forcing you to spend hours bent double under a scorching sun. Scythes, with their longer blades, are for haymaking, requiring a powerful, rhythmic swing that can destroy your back in a single season. For threshing the harvested grain, you'll use a flail, basically two sticks joined by a leather thong, which you'll swing for endless, mind-numbing hours inside a dusty barn, beating the grain from the stalks. There are also hoes, spades, and axes, all crude, all heavy, all demanding immense physical exertion. Accidents are common. A slipped axe, a mishandled scythe, a foot under a heavy plow. And with no modern medicine, even a small injury can fester, leading to disability or death. These aren't tools of empowerment. They are instruments of your servitude. Your year is a relentless cycle of agricultural tasks, each season bringing its own particular brand of misery. Spring arrives, not with gentle breezes and romantic rebirth, but with the back-breaking labor of plowing. The heavy, wet soil resists your every effort. Then comes sowing, broadcasting seeds by hand across the furrows, praying that birds, worms, or bad weather don't undo your work before it even begins. Fences and drainage ditches, vital for protecting crops and land, constantly need mending after the ravages of winter. If your family has a few sheep, spring is also lambing season, a period of anxiety and extra care. Summer means the hay harvest, crucial for feeding livestock through the coming winter. Under the blazing sun, you'll swing your scythe for hour after hour, the air thick with dust and pollen, your body screaming for rest. Then comes the weeding, an endless battle against invasive plants trying to choke the life out of your lord's precious crops, and your own, if you get a spare moment. The days are at their longest, and so, conveniently for your lord, is your workday. Autumn is the climax of your agricultural year, the grain harvest. This is a period of frantic, desperate activity, as the entire village, men, women, and children, mobilizes to bring in the wheat, barley, or oats before the weather turns. Bent over with sickles, you cut stalk after stalk, binding them into sheaves, which are then carted to the Lord's barn and your own smaller store. The pressure is immense. A delayed or spoiled harvest means starvation in the winter. Once gathered, the grain must be threshed, often continuing well into the colder months. And just when you think you can collapse, it's time to pay your dues. A significant portion of your hard-won harvest goes directly to the lord of the manor, and another 10%, the tithe, goes to the church. What's left is yours to try and survive on. Winter offers a slight reprieve from fieldwork, but it's no holiday. Threshing often continues indoors. Tools need mending, buildings need patching. Animals, huddled with you for warmth or in their own crude shelters, need constant care. Women will spend endless hours spinning wool or flax to make thread for clothing. The days are short, dark, and bitterly cold in your smoky, drafty hut. Hunger is a constant gnawing presence as your meager stores dwindle. Fear of not making it to the next harvest is your winter blanket. This life of toil is, of course, an equal opportunity hell, though with gendered divisions of suffering. Men typically handle the heaviest field work, wrestling the plow, digging ditches, swinging the scythe and axe, and any specialized crafts like basic carpentry or blacksmithing, if the village possesses such a skilled individual. Women, however, bear a double burden. They assist in the fields, especially during planting, weeding, and the crucial harvest, but they are also solely responsible for the domestic sphere. This includes the endless tasks of cooking the meager meals over an open fire, attempting to clean a hut that is fundamentally uncleanable, hauling water from the well, tending the small family garden plot, which might provide a few vital extra vegetables or herbs, attempting to make or mend the rough, homespun clothes for the family, brewing the weak ale, and, of course, bearing and raising children, many of whom will not survive. Children, as we've seen, are initiated into labor as soon as they are physically able. They glean leftover grains from the harvested fields, every kernel counts, scare birds from newly sown seeds, gather firewood, watch over the family's pig or goose, and generally contribute in any way they can. Their childhood is not a time of learning and play, but an early induction into the family's desperate struggle for sustenance. The cumulative effect of this relentless, unvarying labor is devastating. Physically, your body is worn down prematurely. By what we'd consider middle age, you'll likely have a permanently bent back, gnarled, calloused hands, and joints that creak and ache with every movement. The lack of proper nutrition and the constant physical strain stunt growth and invite disease. Mentally, the drudgery can be soul-crushing. The endless repetition, the lack of any prospect for change or improvement, the constant awareness of your own powerlessness. It breeds a deep-seated weariness, a resignation that can be mistaken for contentment by those who don't look too closely. This isn't the honest toil that romantic poems might depict. This is a system designed to extract the maximum amount of labor for the minimum amount of sustenance, leaving you too exhausted to dream of anything better. Your greatest ambition, after a day of such labor, is not glory or riches, but simply a few hours of oblivion on your straw pallet before the grind begins anew. So, you're toiling away from dawn till dusk, every muscle screaming, every day a carbon copy of the last. But surely, you're not entirely alone in this suffering. What about community? Social life? Well, yes, your village is a community, in the sense that you're all stuck in the same muddy, flea-bitten boat. Life is intensely communal, largely because it has to be. Cooperation is essential for survival. Families might share a plow team, help each other during the harvest rush, or collectively try to fix the village well when it inevitably gets contaminated with something unpleasant. But don't mistake this for a cozy, idyllic rural paradise. In such close quarters, with resources so scarce and life so hard, everyone knows everyone else's business. Gossip is the primary form of entertainment and information exchange, and it can be vicious. Squabbles over wandering pigs, disputed garden plots, or accusations of theft, of a turnip, perhaps, are frequent and fierce. Your neighbors are your support system and your chief tormentors, often simultaneously. The village is a closed, tight-knit world, deeply suspicious of outsiders, be they traveling peddlers, who might cheat you, vagabonds, who might rob you, or even peasants from the next village over, who are probably just as miserable but are still, somehow, them and not us. Your social circle is small, and your interactions are mostly about survival, obligation, and trying not to get on anyone's bad side. The absolute, unshakable center of your village life, both physically and spiritually, is the church. That stone building, often the only one of any permanence besides perhaps the Lord's manor house, dominates the landscape and your existence. Attendance at Sunday Mass is not optional. It's a duty, enforced by social pressure and the watchful eye of the priest. He is a figure of immense power and authority in your small world, often one of the few, if any, literate individuals. He christens you, marries you, if you live long enough and can afford the small fee, and will eventually bury you. He hears your confessions, a terrifying prospect when your sins mostly involve coveting your neighbor's slightly fatter chicken, or occasionally skipping out on your labor duties, and doles out penance. The church offers a framework for understanding your harsh life. It's God's will, a test of your faith, a prelude to the glorious afterlife, or the fiery alternative. It provides solace, perhaps, through ritual and shared belief. But it also demands its pound of flesh, or rather its tenth of your grain, your livestock, your meager produce. The tithe is a heavy burden on your already stretched resources. And let's not forget the constant, vivid reminders of hell and damnation, a very real and terrifying prospect that keeps you anxious about the state of your soul. The church bells dictate the rhythm of your day, calling you to prayer, marking the hours of labor, and tolling mournfully for the frequent deaths. It is both a sanctuary and a source of profound anxiety. Are there any breaks from this relentless cycle of toil and prayer? Yes, the holy days, or holidays as we'd now call them. These are precious, eagerly anticipated respites, often tied to the agricultural calendar, like Plough Monday after the Christmas break, or Lammas Day celebrating the first grain harvest, or major Christian festivals like Christmas, Easter, and Whitsun, along with various saints' days. Don't imagine lavish celebrations. For you, a peasant, it means a day off from laboring in the Lord's fields. There might be a special church service, perhaps followed by some communal feasting. Think slightly more pottage than usual, maybe a bit of extra ale, and if the Lord is feeling generous, or wants to show off, perhaps some roasted meat. There would be dancing, if you had the energy, to the tune of a pipe or a drum, rough and tumble games, wrestling matches, and archery contests, though your bow is for poaching, not sport, if you're honest. These festivals are a vital chance to bond as a community, to temporarily forget your hardships, to engage in courtship, such as it is, and to generally let off a bit of steam. But even these brief moments of joy are often overshadowed by the fact that tomorrow it's back to the grind, and any overindulgence today will be paid for dearly. Your vacation is essentially a 24-hour pass from absolute misery to slightly less misery with weak beer. What happens when disputes arise or when someone steps out of line? Justice in your village is dispensed at the manor court, usually presided over by the lord of the manor or his steward, a man whose primary loyalty is, unsurprisingly, to the Lord. This court deals with all sorts of local issues: peasants failing to perform their labor services, animals straying into the wrong fields, petty theft, arguments that escalate into fisticuffs, and any breach of the myriad complex manorial customs that dictate your life. You have very few actual rights as you'd understand them. If you are accused, you might be able to speak in your defense, or call upon neighbors to attest to your character, but evidence is often hearsay, and guilt is frequently presumed. Punishments are designed to be swift, public, and painful, serving as a deterrent to others. Most common are fines, a few pence you can ill afford, or payment in kind, like a chicken or a portion of your grain. For more serious offenses, or for repeat offenders, there's public humiliation in the stocks or pillory, where you'd be pelted with rotten fruit, mud, and abuse by your fellow villagers. Flogging is also a popular option. Justice is not about fairness. It's about maintaining order and reinforcing the Lord's absolute authority. Appealing a decision is virtually impossible. You just take your punishment and try to keep your head down. Sickness in this world is not an occasional inconvenience. It's a constant life-threatening shadow. Your diet, as we've established, is poor, leaving your immune system about as robust as a wet paper bag. Your living conditions are unsanitary. Your exposure to cold, damp, and relentless physical strain makes you a prime target for any number of ailments. Common complaints include fevers of unknown origin, agues, coughs and lung infections that could be anything from a bad cold to pneumonia or tuberculosis, the ever-popular dysentery, the bloody flux, and a delightful array of skin diseases. Boils, scabies, shingles, thanks to your intimate relationship with dirt and vermin. What passes for medical care is terrifyingly inadequate. There are no sterile clinics, no diagnostic tools, no antibiotics. Your first port of call is likely a local wise woman, or herb man, whose knowledge is a mixture of generations of passed-down herbal remedies, practical experience, and a healthy dose of superstition. They might offer you a poultice of dubious ingredients, a bitter infusion of herbs, or a charm to ward off evil spirits. Prayers are, of course, heavily relied upon. If things get really bad, and if you lived near a town, which you probably don't, and had any money, which you definitely don't, you might encounter a barber surgeon whose skills, as we saw with the knights, often do more harm than good. For you, a serious illness or injury is usually a one-way ticket to the village graveyard. Leeches, by the way, would be considered a fairly advanced medical intervention. Given all this, it won't surprise you to learn that life expectancy for a 1300s peasant is depressingly short. A shocking number of infants die before their first birthday. Childhood is a gauntlet of disease and accident. If you manage to survive to adulthood and avoid being carried off by famine, plague, the Black Death is looming later in this century, a truly terrifying prospect we haven't even touched yet. Or a particularly nasty infection, you might live into your 30s or early 40s. Anyone older is a rarity, a gnarled survivor. Old age arrives early and hits hard. Death, therefore, is not a distant concept, but a familiar, ever-present reality. Every family has experienced the loss of children, siblings, or parents. Funerals are simple, somber affairs, your body wrapped in a shroud and buried in the consecrated ground of the churchyard. Grief is raw and real, but perhaps also somewhat dulled by its sheer frequency. You live your life in the constant shadow of death. This constant proximity to mortality profoundly shapes your worldview. The Church's teachings about the afterlife, the promise of heaven for the righteous, the terrifying eternal torment of hell for sinners, and the concept of purgatory, are not abstract theological concepts. They are deeply ingrained, urgent realities. Your brief, hard, often miserable life on earth is framed as a trial, a test of your faith and obedience. Every hardship, every loss, is interpreted through this spiritual lens. This might offer some a sliver of comfort, a hope for a better existence beyond the grave. For others, it's just another source of pervasive anxiety, the fear of dying, unshriven, of facing divine judgment for your petty, everyday sins. Your focus is less on improving your earthly lot, which seems impossible anyway, and more on securing a favorable outcome in the world to come. After all, when your current existence is this grim, the promise of something, anything better is a powerful opiate. In your cramped mud and wattle world, one figure looms larger than any other, more immediate than the distant king, more tangible even than God, whose presence is mainly filtered through the local priest. This is the lord of the manor. He might be a minor knight with a small estate, a powerful baron controlling vast swathes of land and numerous villages like yours, or even a monastic order, a collective of supposedly pious men who are just as adept at squeezing every last drop of labor and produce from their tenants as any secular noble. To you, this lord, regardless of his specific title, is the sun around which your miserable peasant planet revolves. He owns the land you till, the cottage you inhabit, if inhabit is the right word for coexisting with smoke and vermin, and, in a very real sense, he owns you. His manor house, probably the largest and most imposing building you'll ever see outside of the church, is a symbol of his power and your insignificance. You might only glimpse it from afar, or perhaps enter its courtyard with a delivery of dues, your heart pounding with a mixture of awe and abject terror. This isn't a relationship of mutual respect. It's one of absolute power on one side and utter subjugation on the other. Your life is enmeshed in a complex web of obligations to this lord, a never-ending series of dues, rents, and services, designed to extract the maximum possible value from your existence. We've touched on week work, those designated days you spend toiling on his personal fields, the demesne, for free. But oh, that's just the appetizer in this feast of exploitation. You also owe him rent in kind. This means a hefty portion of whatever your own meager strips of land produce. Bushels of your best grain, a piglet from your sow's latest litter, if you're so fortunate, a dozen of your precious eggs, perhaps some honey from your beehives, if you haven't starved and eaten the bees yet, or a portion of the weak ale your wife brews. These aren't polite requests. They are demanded at specific times of the year, regardless of whether your own family is on the brink of starvation. Sometimes, increasingly as the centuries wear on, there might be a demand for rent in cash, a terrifying prospect when your access to actual currency is minimal. How do you get cash? By trying to sell a tiny surplus at a local market, if you can get permission to go. And if you even have a surplus after the Lord and the Church have taken their shares. On top of this, there's boon work. Extra, compulsory, unpaid labor demanded during peak agricultural seasons like the harvest or haymaking, precisely when you're most desperate to tend to your own crops. Your Lord needs his harvest in now, and your needs are, shall we say, a secondary consideration. And just for good measure, many lords can levy a tallage, an arbitrary tax, basically whenever they feel they need a bit more income, or just want to remind you who's boss. There's no negotiation, no parliamentary debate. You just pay, or face the consequences. The extortion doesn't stop with your labor and produce. Even the most personal milestones of your life are an opportunity for the Lord to assert his rights, and extract a fee. When you, as the head of your peasant household, eventually shuffle off this mortal coil, your grieving family gets to experience the joy of Harriet. This is an inheritance tax, medieval style. The Lord is entitled to claim your best beast, your prize ox, your only cow, the animal that might be the difference between your family plowing their field next spring or starving. It's a crippling blow to an already impoverished household, a final kick in the teeth from the feudal system. And what about matters of the heart, or at least procreation? If your daughter wishes to marry, especially if she intends to marry a man from outside your lord's manor, you must pay merchant. This fine is essentially compensation to the lord for losing a potential laborer, or more cynically, a breeder of future laborers for his estate. It's a stark reminder that even your family, your children, are considered part of the manor's assets, their lives and futures subject to the lord's economic interests. Your personal life is just another column in his ledger. Beyond direct labor and produce, your lord has other ingenious ways to wring value from you, primarily through monopolies. You grow the grain, but are you allowed to grind it into flour yourself, using a simple hand quern? Of course not. You are compelled to take your precious harvest to the lord's mill. There, the lord's miller, often one of the most distrusted and disliked figures in the village, rightly suspected of taking more than his fair share, will grind it for you, for a hefty fee, usually a portion of your flour, known as multure. Similarly, you might be required to bake your bread in the Lord's communal oven, again, for a fee. Fancy pressing your own grapes or apples if your region produces them? Think again. The Lord's wine press or cider press is your only option, and naturally, it comes at a price. These aren't conveniences provided for your benefit. They are carefully constructed monopolies designed to prevent you from becoming self-sufficient, and to ensure yet another steady stream of income flows from your pocket, or your grain sack, into his coffers. Every step of your struggle for sustenance is another opportunity for him to profit. Your actual face-to-face encounters with the Lord himself are likely to be rare, unless he's a particularly hands-on and probably tyrannical type. or your manner is very small. More often your dealings are with his appointed officials. There might be a reeve, who is himself a peasant, chosen, or coerced, to oversee the work of his fellow villagers. This is an unenviable position, caught between the demands of the lord and the resentment of his neighbors. Then there's the bailiff or steward, a more professional estate manager, often literate, whose job is to maximize the lord's profits and ensure the smooth running of the exploitation machine. When you do find yourself in the august presence of your lord, perhaps summoned for some infraction, or on a rare ceremonial occasion, the expected demeanor is one of utter servility. Cap clutched in your calloused hands, eyes downcast, you'll bow or scrape, mumbling respectful, fearful greetings. Fear is the lubricant that keeps the gears of this relationship turning smoothly. You don't look him in the eye. You don't speak unless spoken to. You make yourself as small and unobtrusive as possible, praying the encounter ends quickly and without dire consequences for you or your family. And the consequences of incurring your lord's displeasure can be severe. This is a world without meaningful legal protection for someone of your status. If you're perceived as lazy in your labor duties, disobedient or, heaven forbid, rebellious, the penalties can range from a harsh public scolding to much worse. Poaching game from the Lord's forest, a desperate attempt to feed your starving family, can result in brutal punishments like flogging, mutilation, having a hand chopped off was a popular deterrent, or even death. Failure to pay your dues could lead to the confiscation of your already meager possessions, or eviction from your hut and the tiny strips of land that are your only means of survival. Even though you are bound to the land as a serf, your right to cultivate your specific plot is based on custom and the Lord's continued goodwill, which can be a very fickle thing. You might be imprisoned in the Lord's private lockup, if he has one, a damp, dark hole where you can contemplate the error of your ways. Your entire existence is lived under the constant, implicit threat of his power. You learn very quickly that obedience, deference, and an ability to appear completely unthreatening are your best survival tools. Ultimately, you come to understand, perhaps not in an analytical, political way, but in the marrow of your bones, that the entire grand edifice of the feudal world, the knights in their shining and expensive armor, the ladies in their fine and equally expensive gowns, the castles, the tournaments, the veneer of chivalry, is all built squarely on your bent back. Your unceasing, unrewarded labor fuels this system. Your poverty ensures their wealth. Your subjugation guarantees their freedom. The stark contrast between your smoky, crowded hovel and your lord's spacious, fortified manor house is a daily, silent sermon on the vast, unbridgeable chasm that separates your worlds. There is no appealing to a higher secular authority for justice against your lord. In your small world, he is the highest authority, his word law, his whim, your destiny. This is the cold, hard reality of your relationship with your master. You are a resource to be managed, an asset to be exploited, a name in his manorial records, and very little more. Life under the heel of your lord is a relentless grind of servitude and submission. You are, for the most part, too exhausted, too malnourished, and too indoctrinated by the church's teachings about social order to seriously contemplate changing your lot. Resignation is your daily bread. Yet, even in the most oppressed souls, a spark of defiance can sometimes flicker. It rarely manifests as open rebellion. The consequences are too terrifying for that. Instead, resistance is often small, subtle, and personal. Perhaps you feign illness to avoid a particularly brutal day of boon work. Maybe you're a little less thorough when weeding the Lord's strips than your own. Perhaps a few of the Lord's turnips accidentally find their way into your family's pottage pot, or a fallen branch from his woods happens to end up on your fire. These are tiny acts of reclaiming some minuscule agency in a life where you have almost none. But sometimes, when conditions become truly unbearable, Perhaps a famine pushes you to the brink, or a new lord is even more cruel and demanding than the last. The simmering resentment of generations can boil over. Whispers in the dark corners of the village, furtive meetings, a shared sense of desperation. These can coalesce into something far more dangerous. When peasant revolts do erupt, and they do, albeit rarely and sporadically in the 1300s prior to the major shifts, they are acts of sheer, unadulterated desperation, the last resort of people with absolutely nothing left to lose. Think of the Jacquerie in France in 1358, a terrifying explosion of peasant fury, fueled by years of grinding poverty, the ravages of war, and the arrogance of the nobility. Peasants rise up, attacking manor houses, slaughtering their lords and ladies, and committing atrocities that mirror the brutality they themselves have endured for centuries. For a brief, terrifying moment, the social order is turned upside down. But these revolts, however ferocious, are almost always doomed from the start. Peasants lack military training, sophisticated weaponry, and cohesive leadership. Their anger, while righteous, is chaotic and undirected. The response from the nobility, once they recover from their initial shock, is swift, organized, and utterly merciless. Knights and men-at-arms, professionals in the art of killing, descend upon the peasant bands, slaughtering them with impunity. Mass executions, burnings, and exemplary tortures follow, designed to hammer home the futility of resistance and to terrify any other peasants who might be getting similar ideas. The brief, flickering hope for change is extinguished in a bloodbath, and the yoke of servitude often settles even more heavily than before. Your act of defiance becomes a cautionary tale, whispered for generations. But just as you're settling back into your usual routine of backbreaking labor and quiet despair, or perhaps reeling from the brutal suppression of some ill-fated local uprising, new whispers begin to circulate through the villages of the mid-14th century. These are not whispers of tax increases or new labor demands from your lord. These are something far more unsettling. Tales carried by itinerant friars, merchants on muddy roads, or sailors in distant ports. They speak of a great pestilence, a terrifying sickness that is devastating lands far to the east. At first, it's just another story, like tales of mythical beasts or faraway kings. Your world is small, and the east is an almost imaginary place. But then the stories get closer. The plague is in Italy, then France. It's crossing the Channel. Fear, an old companion, takes on a new and unknown dimension. What is this sickness? How does it spread? Is it God's wrath for the sins of mankind? Your priest preaches repentance. Your lord looks worried, if he hasn't already fled to some isolated rural estate. And you, the peasant, can do little but pray and wait, your gut churning with a primal dread for a faceless enemy you cannot fight with a pitchfork or a prayer. Then, it arrives, the Black Death. It might creep into your village with a sick traveler, or in the fleas on rats scurrying from a passing merchant's cart. Suddenly, people you know, people you see every day, begin to fall ill with terrifying speed. The symptoms are horrific: high fever, vomiting, agonizing aches, and the dreaded buboes. Swollen, painful lumps in the groin, armpits, or neck, often turning black before the victim succumbs. Death usually follows within days, sometimes hours. There is no cure, no understanding of its cause. Theories range from poisoned air, miasma, to unfavorable planetary alignments, to the wrath of God. Panic grips your village. The bonds of community, already strained, begin to fray and snap. People avoid each other. Doors are barred. The familiar routines of agricultural life, the rhythm that has dictated your existence, grind to a halt as workers sicken and die. Who will tend the fields when the plowman is dead and his family dying? Who will harvest the grain when there are no hands left to wield the sickle? Daily life, if you can even call it that during a plague year, becomes a living nightmare. The Sound of coughing, of moans of pain, becomes the background music to your existence, punctuated by the frantic, then increasingly weary, tolling of the church bell, announcing yet another death. You watch in horror as members of your own family succumb. Do you stay and care for them, risking almost certain infection yourself? Or do you flee, abandoning your loved ones in their final, agonizing hours? The fear of contagion is so overwhelming that many do forsake their sick, leaving them to die alone. The dead pile up faster than they can be buried. Proper Christian burials become a luxury. Mass graves, hastily dug pits, become the norm. The village priest, who is supposed to offer comfort and last rites, might be among the first to die, given his exposure to the sick. Your lord and his family may have already decamped to a supposedly safer location, leaving you and your fellow peasants to face the pestilence alone. The familiar lanes of your village, once bustling with the sounds of life and labor, become eerily silent, haunted by the ghosts of the departed and the terror of the survivors. The psychological trauma is immense. An overwhelming sense of grief, a paralyzing fear, a descent into religious fanaticism for some, or a reckless fatalistic hedonism for others who believe their end is nigh. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die takes on a very literal meaning. If, by some miracle of constitution or sheer luck, you survive the first devastating wave of the plague, the world you emerge into is irrevocably changed. Perhaps a third, a half, or even more of your village population is gone. The silence of depopulation is deafening. Fields lie fallow, cottages stand empty, their former inhabitants now just memories or names whispered in sorrow. The intricate web of social and economic obligations is shattered. But amidst the devastation, a strange and unexpected consequence begins to make itself felt. A severe scarcity of labor. With so many peasants dead, the surviving lords, desperate to have their lands cultivated and their harvests brought in, find themselves in an unaccustomed position. Suddenly your labor, once taken for granted, has value. For the first time in living memory, you, the humble peasant, might find yourself with a sliver of bargaining power. Some lords might offer better terms, higher wages, if you're a landless laborer, or a relaxation of feudal dues to entice workers to stay or to attract them from other manors. This won't be an overnight revolution, and the nobility will fight tooth and nail to maintain the old order. But the seeds of change, watered by an ocean of tears and death, have been sown. The immediate aftermath, however, is less about economic shifts and more about profound psychological scarring. The Black Death has not just decimated populations. It has shaken the very foundations of your medieval worldview. How could God allow such indiscriminate slaughter? Why did so many devout priests and monks perish while some perceived sinners were spared? The old certainties are eroded. The authority of the Church, while still powerful, is questioned by some in a way it wasn't before. The world feels more random, more dangerous, more terrifyingly fragile. You've stared into the abyss, and the abyss has stared back, leaving an indelible mark on your soul. Life, which was already cheap, now seems almost unbearably precarious. The joyous festivals of the past now feel like a distant, hollow echo in a land filled with fresh graves and lingering sorrow. Your unromantic life has just found a new, even darker shade of bleak. You've walked through the valley of the shadow of death, and somehow you've emerged on the other side, blinking in a world that is both hauntingly familiar and terrifyingly altered. The immediate years following the first, devastating wave of the Black Death are a strange, disorienting time. The landscape of your village is emptier, the silence in the fields often broken only by the wind, not by the songs or shouts of a full workforce. Familiar faces are gone forever, leaving gaping holes in the fabric of your small community and in your own heart. Grief is a constant, dull ache. You are, in every sense, a survivor, trying to rebuild a life from the shattered pieces, all while the fear of the plague's return. A fear that is entirely justified, as it will flare up again in subsequent, though usually less catastrophic, outbreaks for decades to come, hangs over everything like a shroud. This new, abnormal, is a life lived amidst ghosts, with the taste of ash still in your mouth. Yet, in this landscape of desolation, an unexpected and unprecedented shift begins to occur, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. With so many millions dead across the continent, from the highest echelons of society down to the lowliest peasant, one commodity has become suddenly, incredibly scarce: your labor. Before the plague, there were always too many peasants, too many hands vying for too few resources, keeping you cheap and disposable. Now, the tables have begun to turn, albeit agonizingly slowly. Lords, their vast estates depopulated, their domains lying fallow, are desperate for tenants to work their land, and laborers to bring in their harvests. For the first time in living memory, you, the humble, downtrodden peasant, might find yourself with a sliver of bargaining power. Some lords, driven by necessity, might offer better terms to keep their remaining peasants from abandoning their holdings. Perhaps lower rents, a reduction in the hated week work, or even actual wages for your labor. You might hear tales of other manors where conditions are slightly less terrible, and the previously unthinkable idea of leaving your ancestral village in search of a better lot might flicker in your mind. Governments and the nobility will try to fight this, of course. Laws like the Statute of Laborers in England attempted to freeze wages and restrict peasant movement. But the sheer economic reality of supply and demand is a powerful force, one that even feudal lords cannot entirely ignore. This newfound leverage, born from an unimaginable tragedy, begins to subtly erode the very foundations of serfdom in many parts of Western Europe. The traditional system, where you were bound to the land and owed fixed labor services, becomes less tenable when you can, theoretically, walk away and find a lord willing to offer more for your work. Lords increasingly find it more practical to commute those labor services into cash payments. They need the money to hire wage laborers, if they can find them and afford them, or to lease out their domain lands to peasant farmers for a fixed rent. This transition is slow, uneven, and fiercely resisted by many in the ruling class. But the trend is there. For you, this might mean a little more control over your own time, a little more focus on cultivating your own holding, and perhaps, if you're exceptionally fortunate and astute, a chance to accumulate a tiny surplus. It's not freedom as you'd recognize it today, not by a long shot, but it's a significant loosening of the chains that bound your ancestors for generations. The cracks in the ancient walls of feudalism are appearing, not through violent revolution alone, but through the Grim Reaper's indiscriminate harvest. However, let's not get carried away with any romantic notions of a sudden peasant utopia. Life, even with these nascent changes, remains overwhelmingly hard, brutal, and short. Those subsequent plague outbreaks, while often less widespread than the initial cataclysm, continue to sweep through, culling the population, bringing fresh waves of terror and grief. Famines, driven by bad weather or the disruptions of war, still stalk the land, and a failed harvest can still mean starvation for your family. Warfare between ambitious kings and nobles continues to crisscross the countryside, with peasant villages like yours often bearing the brunt of marching armies, requisitions, and casual violence. Your hovel is still a drafty, smoky, uncomfortable shelter. Your diet, while perhaps marginally improved if you have more control over your produce, is still meager and monotonous. Your access to anything resembling medicine or hygiene is still virtually non-existent. That increased life expectancy you might dream of? It's still decades, if not centuries, away from anything a modern person would consider acceptable. The good old days were an unrelenting nightmare. And these new days, while offering a faint glimmer of something different, are still steeped in profound hardship and uncertainty. You live with the weight of memory. The trauma of the plague years, the faces of the dead, the sheer terror of it all. These things don't just vanish. They become part of you, shaping your outlook on life, perhaps making you more cautious, more suspicious, or more fiercely protective of what little you have. The world feels less stable, less predictable. The old certainties, even the grim certainty of your place at the bottom of the social order, have been shaken. You might look at your children and wonder what kind of world they will inherit. One that is slowly, painfully crawling towards something better, or one that is simply lurching from one disaster to the next. The answer is far from clear. Your individual life, as a 14th century peasant, remains a testament to human endurance in the face of almost unimaginable adversity. You won't live to see the grand sweep of historical change that your generation and the Black Death inadvertently set in motion. You won't read the history books that analyze the decline of manorialism or the rise of a wage-based economy. Your concerns are more immediate. The next harvest, the health of your family, the demands of your lord, who is still very much a powerful figure, even if his grip has slightly loosened. Your legacy is not one of grand achievements or noble deeds recorded in song. It is the legacy of survival, of resilience, of countless generations who toiled in obscurity, their joys small and fleeting, their sorrows immense and constant. It is on the foundation of your suffering, and the slow, hard-won changes that followed calamitous events like the plague, that a different world would eventually, painstakingly, be built. So, as you finally drift off to sleep tonight, in your warm bed with a full stomach, in a room with actual windows and a solid roof, perhaps spare a thought for your 14th century peasant counterpart. No Wi-Fi, no antibiotics, no social safety net, no concept of personal freedom beyond the dream of surviving another harsh winter or avoiding the bailiff's angry fist. Their world was one of relentless toil, grinding poverty, pervasive disease, and the constant looming presence of hunger and death, all under an oppressive social system designed to keep them firmly in their place. If ever you're tempted to romanticize the simple life of the past, remember this. For the vast majority, it was anything but simple, and rarely anything but brutal. The good old days, as they say, were, for most of humanity, an unmitigated horror show. Sweet dreams. Or perhaps, just be profoundly grateful for the alarm clock that will wake you in a world they could scarcely have imagined. You've made it through. They mostly did not.